Welcome everybody. This is my YouTube channel, Truth in Motion Studios. If you like what you hear and you are interested in more conversation on healing from spiritual abuse and pursuing healthy spirituality, feel free to subscribe. So my guest for you today is, for the very first time, complete nepotism at work here. It's my cousin, only around seventh corners, but they're all very important. My cousin, Brad Jersak. Hi, Eden.
Hi, Christina.
It's
Thanks
good
for
to
honoring me. Thanks for honoring me with having the position of the first relative that you get to interview.
Yes, yes, and you told me Brad makes is basically my brother-in-law, so I had no idea when I interviewed him in April. I interviewed my brother-in-law. No big deal. Around seven corners, but yes, that's cool. It's super fun. Yes, so your husband, whom you might have heard at home, Brad Jersak, the author, and you are the woman. I don't want to say, they say the strong woman behind. You're not behind. You are your own entity with him in the big picture, but I find you so fascinating, and I perceive you as being raw and real, humble, and yet so wise. That's why I wanted to have my audience get to know you.
All right.
So let's begin getting to know you, Eden. I'm thinking, how we all get raised into a reality, a narrative for family, for church, for faith. And we either stay there all our lives or we progress, we mature, we change our thinking, wrestle with what we were told is normal, is the way to do it. So you also are from a Mennonite background, like my mother was. I personally wasn't raised Mennonite, but Baptist. Tell me everything. How did you progress from little Mennonite girl to where you are now?
Okay. I grew up in the church that my mom grew up in, and the only church my dad actually ever knew, and still goes there. And if anything, in this whole process that I can take you through, I've probably circled back, and I'm kind of back there in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
So even though my parents were Christians, and my whole family was very faith-based in our Mennonite culture, we didn't very often do like family devotions or anything except a prayer at the beginning of a dinner time that was a pre-described prayer that we all just knew the verse to. So even though I was absolutely a Christian, I wasn't like brought up in a really like Nazi kind of Christian home, right? Even though we spoke German. And then upon graduating from high school and taking a year off, I decided to go to Bible school. And I spent 4 years at Bible school, and that's where Brad and I met. And in that period of time, I was definitely kind of indoctrinated into kind of a more structured and rigid sort of faith that I hadn't known before. And because, we were all in it together, there was, I think there was like over 700 Bible school students at this school. We were all, drinking the Kool-Aid at the same time. We came to the same conclusions and we bought in. And then after,
here's the other Eden.
then as that ended and Brad and I got married after our 4 years, we lived in the area that my parents lived in, and we went to the church that I had been going to. A year later, Brad started into his master's program. And so then we moved away. and we were on the prairies, not too far from where you are now, for a couple of years. And when he had finished that, we actually got a call from the church that I had been at, grew up in, and Brad was asked to be the associate and youth pastor for the church I grew up in. So we spent the Mennonite church. So Brad had grown up Baptist, and definitely, I mean, the church gave a resounding yes to his position. The Mennonite whatever hierarchy outside of the church that also had a say in whether someone would be accepted as a pastor, they had reservations because he was a Baptist, and he wasn't, in particular, he wasn't a pacifist, right? But in those 10 years, with some significant adjustments from people who just loved him and brought him through, and watching, I think it's Apocalypse Now, which is a war movie, Brad became a pacifist. And he's probably a truer pacifist than most Mennonites are, honestly, because he tries to be a peacekeeper and a peacemaker on all levels, not just that he won't use his fists or a weapon, you know? At the end of that 10 years, we went into another church, and it was a church plant. It was, most people would call it non-denominational. We called it multi-denominational because we didn't want to water down people's experiences from wherever they were bringing their faith from, right? And what we wanted was, instead of kind of having a watery soup of, okay, let's just find a couple of little things that we can all agree on, we're like, no, let's make a really delicious stew, and we all bring the flavors. So if you're a Baptist and you love your big, huge honking Bible, bring it to church and read scripture to us, and like, love us with what you love. And if you're an Anglican and you love communion, then why don't you run the communion table and put all your love for communion here for us all to experience? And if you're Mennonite, come and bring your desire for social justice and for pacifism and for peacekeeping, and whatever other flavors there were. If you were more of a Pentecostal kind of thing, then bring your tongues and pray and show us what we've been missing. And it was really extraordinary to watch this whole thing come about, and how well we could bring our pieces from our journey and make that a contribution to the church. Brad stepped down 10 years later, in 2008, and the church asked if I would step into that role. And I led that church for another 5 years. And I learned a lot during that time. And then in 2013, at the end of 2013, I stepped down. And for the last few years, I just was someone who sat in the pew in our little church called Fresh Wind. And then in the last 2.5 years, I started going to a new church, and it has all the lovely flavors of our Fresh Wind church, but our Fresh Wind church just doesn't exist anymore. And I just loved what they brought. So in each of those changes, there were adjustments that were made. So I started out like faith was almost cultural rather than personal. Even though I did make a personal choice as a child, and I was baptized as a personal choice. Then I get into Bible school and it becomes a lot more legalistic. And then we start pastoring, and it's kind of boots on the ground, and like you're looking in kids' faces, and you actually have to have something to offer them that makes them want to be in relationship with God, and to mirror to them, what does a relationship with God look like? And then moving on to Fresh Wind, our church was made up of people with disabilities. A really, probably a solid 25% or more of us were either people in wheelchairs or in need of full-time care, or their caregivers. And then also children. We kept children in the service with us throughout. And then prodigals, people who were saying, you know what, this is church's last chance. I've been out there and I didn't find anything more meaningful, and so I'm back here because I know what I'm getting. But boy, one misstep and you guys are we're out of here. And then we had also the working poor, like people who really lived paycheck to paycheck, um, and that was a challenge all in its own. So those were the four kind of groups of people that we predominantly found were attracted to our message. And so that was where God had to be really real, and where you had a church full of people who needed healing on all levels, and yet we still had to endure with the things that needed healing because they weren't. And now how are you gonna like make that work for people without trying to oversell what you're selling, right? And now, like in these last few years, I'm really coming back to the peaceful side of things with God, recognizing how to move in peaceful ways with people, how to be like a truth teller that doesn't cause harm because you're just saying it as it is. And also allowing God to be present in everything, and looking for him in everything. So if my day is difficult or hard, I'm looking for him, not for his backhand, like why is this happening to me, God, but as a like where are you, and this drawing in because I know you're with me. And so that's kind of been the trajectory of my faith. And I'm honestly like, I'm just really at peace, and I love where I've landed. And if I can help other people to get there, then mission accomplished.
What would you say is the one way to start to move in that direction, having peace with God and with self?
Oh, like easily being real with yourself and being real with God. Absolutely. Um, I remember as a kid, like tripping over the same things over and over again. So let's say it was being disobedient, or telling a lie, or somehow harming someone, like being mean. And so we can kind of get into a cycle, and we can do that as kids too. And I would go to God, and I would want to apologize again.
Yeah.
And I remember having like inner dialogues of going like, how many times is this going to happen? Like, how many times am I going to apologize for the same thing and not have a different path to walk instead of doing this? you know? And um, I mean, unfortunately, it was decades later that I realized if I'm just authentic, if I'm not trying to cover things up, or if I'm just self-aware enough that I go, the reason I'm doing this is because I'm scared or I'm angry or I'm whatever, fill in the blanks. And then I can say at that point, oh, okay, then if that's the issue here, not so much how it acts out. If the issue is my fear, now I can address why this keeps happening for me. And that has been huge for me. Part of how that came about was when Brad had stepped down at Fresh Wind and I stepped in. We went straight to counseling because we realized, for one, he was going through a burnout, but also, his style and my style are different. And we're married. And like the complication, I mean, it could be like really, really tough. So we went for counseling right away to see if we could get help to walk through all of this. And one particular day, we're driving there and to the counselor, and Brad says, "Are you looking forward to this?" And I said, "Absolutely not." And he goes, "I have a thought." I'm like, "Okay." And he goes, "What if we don't go through issue after issue after issue, and instead we get some skills about how to communicate with each other, like what will work and what won't?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds really like a great idea." So we got there, and we actually only had maybe 2 or 3 more sessions after that, because we determined that we were actually able to negotiate and walk through some of these difficult things after, one, discovering what each of our own needs were, but then also knowing how to communicate best with the other person. And for me, part of it was I'd maybe have like a frustrating day at work, and I would come home and I would want to talk something over with him. But he's in burnout, and he left that for a reason, right? So what ended up happening was I had to become self aware enough to know what I needed and then express it to Brad. So maybe um, someone's need was just too big for me. Oh no, there was a problem like that I wasn't sure what to do. So I could say either, what I really need right now is just a hug. I'm going to tell you something and it's hard, and I just need to feel loved and held. Or I could say, something frustrating happened today and I want to run something by you and just get your idea of like how could this go? Is this a good direction to take? I really actually do need your help. Or I could say, I just actually need to verbally process, and I want some eyeballs to be looking at while I'm doing this. And so you're not responsible for anything. I just need you to hear me out, or I just need to be heard more than anything. And as soon as we could do that, because he wasn't listening to me wondering, oh, what is it she needs? What is it? Do I fix it or don't I fix it? And, we're complicated as humans. I'm not going to say as women, as humans, we are complicated.
Yeah.
And so once we could establish that, it made a huge difference to how we were relating. And now I've even actually forgotten what you were asking about because I've gone so many different directions.
I think it was this one thing, how to get started on coming to peace with yourself and God. And you said, it was a very good answer, being real with yourself and with God, and finding ways to communicate with, well, your spouse and finding how your needs can be met. Not everybody has a spouse. Not everybody's a pastor. So whatever
Yeah.
our needs are, it is important for us to really acknowledge them to ourselves
Yeah.
and to God, and then find healthy ways that those needs could be met without milking other people.
Exactly. And then, I mean, that's just a really good life skill to have, to recognize in this moment, I need this. And then to have outlets and ways of getting what you need, not in a give me kind of way, but in a I'm responsible for myself. And I'm not going to wait around if I need if I need a friend, I am not going to sit here moping in my own house, wondering if anyone has thought about me today, and if they would even consider picking up their phone or texting me or whatever. I am going to, for myself, go, I need a friend. Who do I want to talk to today? And then I'm going to initiate, because that's how we care for ourselves. We don't wait with hat in hand and beg for crumbs from people. We express what we need, and then they can either decide to join us in that need, or they can go, you know what, I don't think I have that for you today. And that's okay, because sometimes I don't have it for someone else in a day too.
Yeah, yeah. And when we say need, then sometimes we realize it'd be nice if I would get this, but I'm going to be okay if I don't get it.
Yeah. And even ask yourself, how can I meet this myself?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So maybe you need to be loved.
Mm.
And you can look around and see if someone would express lovely things to you, or you know yourself and you know what you need. So why not love yourself?
Right. Yeah. Why not positive self-talk?
Yeah.
Truthful, positive, not, I built myself up in my own head more. Like you told me a while ago on the example that you made a dish and people weren't responding the way you would have wished they would have, but you started to talk to yourself about that you're really proud of what you made and it's delicious.
Yeah. You know what? I did it out loud even, right? So, you know, and I mean, I don't know how long. I mean, it was decades that and you know what? I'm not, don't want to throw my family under the bus. They are very expressive, and they love what I cook for them. But the particular scenario was, I was making dinner, and I take time and energy. I don't try to just make something fast, for the most part, and I want it to taste good, and I try to lay out the table, and I mean, I put effort into this. And then sometimes, you know, you would sit down, we would pray, and then, you know, we have three sons, and they would just start eating, and they would get lost in shoveling the food into their mouths, and not a word would be said. And I'd be sitting there, like, kind of hanging in the balance, wondering, like, well, do they like it? I guess watching the speed of how fast the fork is going back into their mouth is going to be, you know, my consolation that, yes, mom, you made another good meal. Um, but I came to this point, and it's probably about 2 years ago or so, where I realized if I need a verbal affirmation, I can give it to myself. And so I knew the effort I had put into this meal, and I would try to take that very first bite, and I would let the flavors go through my mouth, and then I would just put my fork back down, and I would just sit back and I go, I'm so glad I made this supper. It tastes so good. And heads would come up. They would look over and they'd go, yeah, mom, it's really good. And so the it's funny because, you know, now for the most part, through COVID, Brad and I have been on our own. And he's just become so effusive with his praise for my food that it sometimes is uncomfortable for me, because all I need is, yeah, this tastes really good. But he's like going on, and I'm like, I don't actually need all that. But it's amazing how just being able to do that on my own expression and meeting my own need, how that has kind of permeated
Mm.
um, to others, and they realize, oh yeah, like we can do this.
Yes, yes. There's so much there. What sparks in me is thinking how, as we express our need and in a way meet it ourselves, how people learn about us. Like we are letting them in a way. They're in a way just witnesses, but in your case, you weren't fishing. You were just being yourself and meeting your own need. But I want to transfer the same thing to this phenomenon that we see in, well, I'm talking about faith dynamics, faith relationships, where people maybe have expressed their need to someone they perceive to be in hierarchy or they are in hierarchy under, and then they are being told that whatever their need is isn't right and it's wrong to even go there. So with that, a shame is growing and a guilt, but certainly a self-denial that becomes spiritualized and really ends up leaving people in severe mental health issues. What are your thoughts on that?
I think a lot of what's going on is that within the construct of the church, when needs are expressed that are either difficult or impossible to meet, um, as leaders, we twist that to kind of bring that back to the person. It's like, sorry, that we can't do that, and it's not valid, or that kind of thing. And I think it would be better if someone's coming with a need that whether you're a leader or a friend or a family member, that you are unable to meet. Can you just sit with them in that need and help them at least find a way for that need to be met? And I think that's a bit of what's been happening with um, with deconstruction, with people's questions, right? The questions are posed and they are seen as a need, and maybe they are an actual need, like I need to understand this or I need to know this. And sometimes there is no understanding and sometimes there is no knowing. But if we can just sit with someone while they go through this process, then at least they're not alone. There's a woman in our town who I met this summer, and she has a really fascinating story. As I think late in her teens, or in her teens somewhere, she was raped behind a store, and she was just walking somewhere and someone took advantage of her. And she spent several decades in the shame of what had happened, feeling responsible for having taken the wrong path home. And I think she didn't even tell her parents right away, or kind of minimized it, but it had really, really traumatized her. So I think a year and a half ago, even though she lives here now, and that was in a different province even, she went and sat for 30 days behind the exact same company of store in kind of the loading dock area, which is where this had happened to her as a teen. And she challenged God to meet her there. And she wrote a short novel, or a short biography of the whole 40 day or 30 days that she was there. And it's exceptional. But she didn't tell anyone really what she was going through until she realized I need to tell someone what's happening. And she went to her pastor and she explained some of the things that were coming about, some of the questions she was asking. And the pastor just sat with her. And he didn't kind of try to course correct, or he didn't try to, you know, even bring like lots of truth. He just sat with her and like, this is really hard. But I'm with you. I'm gonna stay here with you. And I think I think if we had more of that, we wouldn't have people tossing everything about their faith out the window. If we can just have permission to go through a process, to ask questions that there may not be answers to, and as leaders, we don't have to have a formulaic way of laying out, like, this is what you must believe, and this is the direction you must take, and this is how you must act. um, I think we'd have more people still feeling like they're part of something that has value. But we've shrunk our faith into such a small little package that anyone who starts asking questions about what's left of this little package, um, there's just no room for that. And and I think if we just gave permission for the process, it would be an entirely different story.
And many things come together why it's not happening. Um, I hear more and more these days, there's multiple sources bringing up the same thing, that coaches for businesses prefer working well with businesses if they go in and get called into churches. They send only their best equipped people, because working with church people is the hardest, if not impossible, because they always have to be right. So it's a personality trait that pastors bring with that certainty. Nope, this is it, and no other way. So in that, there's no fluidity there. There can't be process that you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know the outcome. You lose control. That's scary for control freaks that don't know that that's what they are. Yeah. But what have you personally experienced with God meeting you in your shame, when you were real with God in your personal shame?
So I have a shame-based personality. That's just a tagline that, tells you that I kind of have a Velcro kind of suit that seems to attract shame and makes it hard to pull it off.
Hmm.
And I grew up with that. I had um, lots of good reasons to have accumulated shame. My Oma, she lived between our house and my aunt and uncle's house on our farm. So there was 3 houses on our farm, and so we were always in each other's homes. And um, my Oma would see us misbehaving outside, and then she would come out and say something horrid like, "Shame on you." And I mean, at the time, sometimes we would laugh and run away, or, sometimes that would sting and hurt. Um, but when I think back to that, I think, wow, like, that's a curse. And I grew up with that, and shame prevented me from doing lots of bad things. Like, I I would get into a situation and I'd think, uh, I'm going to be ashamed of this afterwards, and so I'm going to not participate. I'm heading home, kind of thing. And that would, I can see that being helpful in that case. But it really showed up dramatically early in our marriage. And I just recall how if I felt shame about something, so perhaps Brad and I had an argument and he had exposed something about the way I was that I felt ashamed about. I would wear that shame like a dirty rag for weeks. And it would overwhelm me. And it would be what, how do I put this? It would be what I put my value in, or it was how my value was ascribed to me. So I could go on with one little thing, and the shame of it would just be horrible to me. And then I wasn't, it prevented me from being able to apologize, because then I would have to be real and say, yes, actually I did that. And I recognize how harmful that was. And it was just, it just paralyzed me from being a healthy, whole person. And I can see how the church has at times also used shame as a form of control. And actually, when I was, Brad and I were talking this morning, and I had been looking through some passages and what they say in shame, and I was just so surprised again at how, even in the New Testament, that, the apostles are writing to the churches and they're calling them out on stuff, and they're like, I'm saying this to you to shame you. And I'm like, what? Yeah. And then, I won't get into this big time because it's Brad's thing and I really don't know what I'm talking about with it. But there's two different kinds of shame. There's the kind of shame that comes on when, yes, we have done something and now it's exposed and we feel the sting of what we have done. And then there's the kind of shame that is put on us by someone who is putting something on us that is not ours to wear. It's not meant for us. It's a control thing, right? So there's different kinds of things, but they can overlap. And so where I was exposed to something's happened and I feel this, and now I feel bad about myself and my value is plummeting by the second. What I learned was, if I can just be real and go, oh, I did that. What can I do to make this right? Suddenly, I'm grabbing this rag that I'm wearing and I'm just tossing it on the ground. I'm like, okay, I have control over this. I can use I can use shame to be something that works for me instead of something that is put on me and that I wear in some sort of oppressive way. I can smell shame a far way off, and so it's not always true, and sometimes I still get this wrong. But when I see someone trying to manipulate someone with shame, I will say something. I will step in. And if I feel for myself that it's coming on me in an old way, in the dirty rag kind of way, I now know, okay, just wait, stop. You've just been exposed. this is okay. Something has happened and you have done something. Now it's your turn to make it right. And so it's just a catalyst to finding God. Has that answered your question?
Yeah.
Or have I not gone far enough? Or
I think I understand, especially the two different kinds of shame. The shame that we have because we're embarrassed and whatever was exposed may, like Richard Rohr calls it, our false self.
yes,
So we can't deal with it. We have to defend it and we can't face it. But you're saying the healing was to face it, to say, thank you very much for pointing this out. I can apologize. I can own this. I can learn how to behave or be in a way that is more in line with who I actually want to be. And then the other shame is, which seems to be the Western culture, especially now, seems like we're back in the Puritan days where we flock people publicly and with social media and we say, shame on you. Everybody on Twitter calls, shame on you for whatever it is. And you can lose your job because you get shamed publicly for making a mistake or being exposed publicly. So it's dangerous even to be weak or to be real, because the consequences can be in these days, you can lose your job. But I think that is a beautiful answer. How is God showing his goodness to you in that? It sounds almost like, oh, God created this way where when we make a mistake, it's so painful, so we have to change. Is that how you perceive it? Or how do you perceive this process of, I'm feeling the shame and now it's up to me?
well, I think what I assumed growing up and, until even just a few years ago, is that shame separated me from God. But nothing separates me from God. And so when I realized that in my shame, God was still right beside me and he was willing to take that off of me as well, that made all the difference. Then it's not having to get over it or somehow wait till the shame rots off of you and then it's like, okay, I can move on now. It is participating with it, or participating with God in it. So even the verse behind me, those who look to him are radiant and their faces are never covered with shame. I'm like, okay, so in my shame, if I look to him and I see how he looks at me, and that's where I get my value, then this shame can be taken care of and addressed, and I can go back to being radiant. And that's, it's not a formula, but it is a pathway to allowing shame, even shame, to be a way back to God and to recognizing how present he is with us no matter what we have done, said, are, all of those things.
Yeah. So I imagine that the changes that you've gone through the decades, and I have 3 eighth corner cousins through you, right? It was 3, or was it 4? 3 sons you have.
Yes.
Yep. So they're my cousins. I claim them. How was raising them? In German we have this phrase. It doesn't translate very well, but this is important because I'm a teacher, and it says that pastors and teachers' kids basically never turn out. So what do you have to say about that, since you both even were pastors? How was raising them and spirituality?
Well, so they were still quite young when we left the Mennonite church. Stephen would have been 6 and Justice was 3 and Dominic was 1, or 7, 4 and 1 maybe. So they don't have a lot of trauma from there. they were still young. And we had good friends there that kind of didn't put the pastor thing on our kids. And then at Fresh Wind, um, people people didn't even know who the pastors were. So then the kids didn't get traumatized by that either, right? And our kids, is interesting. I think Justice must have been around 11 or 12. And I remember we were sitting right here at the table in our kitchen, and and I think it was Justice who just turns and looks at Brad and goes, "What do you do, Dad?" As in a job. And we just laughed so hard. And we felt like that was actually like this big accomplishment for us to have got our kids that far into their growing up without having the stigma of being a pastor's kid. And, kudos to, our Fresh Wind community who didn't put that on our kids. And, and we tried really hard not to say things like, well, how will that reflect on our family, or how will that reflect on the church? And, I think Brad's mom used to say, Bradley, what about your testimony? And, we all have stuff like that where, there was this sort of responsibility to be more than others for the sake of your family pride or your church reputation. So, our kids were given a lot of freedom in how they expressed their faith and also how they didn't express their faith. So, our oldest, Stephen, is 30, and he lives in Toronto with his wife. And I think his expression of his faith is unbelievably beautiful. I am touched by it over and over again. And yet, besides, when he visits here, he hasn't been in church at least for a decade, probably. But I'm not concerned that, his faith is not real or his relationship with God is not authentic. And our son Justice, he lives in Korea, and he's probably the most overt in his expressions of faith, and yet he doesn't go to church regularly either. But he does have a very sensitive and he's very tuned into God. And Dominic, our youngest, he's been living in Winnipeg for the last 4 months, and is now just in process of moving back to British Columbia. And he might be the person in this world who I most see like really representing God the best. And he doesn't go to church. And some people could say he's deconstructed. I would just say he's living his faith out as authentically as he can. And so we've really tried to just give our kids the freedom that we wanted to have in expressing our faith, without trying to control. And we will, we have very strong opinions and very heartfelt thoughts on things, and we can sit around the table and we can, really feel, the energy of where people have come to. But in the end, we just want everyone to be able to express themselves and and feel like they can own their own faith.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. I was thinking, since you are an expert on shame, I would run.
I'm an expert in that. I know shame because I own it.
Right, exactly. You're the owner of shame, and I know nothing about that. I'm not buying. No, I wanted to ask you a question about when my son Eden was 3.5. He had a little thing with riding the bicycle for one of the first times, the ones with the extra wheels. And I was holding the camera on him. My husband was holding him from the back, pushing him a little bit. And he didn't have the leg strength to make the pedals go. We have a gravel road right in front of, that's our driveway. So it was hard. And we probably underestimated what that put on him, but he was very excited. So just like we just went with it without really having clear expectations. But as I was filming him and his dad was cheering him on, he said, "I'm so embarrassed of myself." This 3.5 year
Mm,
old. And I find myself again and again so surprised at where is that coming from? He is so self-conscious. And if it's, as far as it's up to me, I know we've been very, very, very kind to him. His grandparents that live upstairs are very kind to him. The kind of shame that he would have perceived would have been something that I feel like he would have read between the lines. It's not like shame on you. Nobody has ever said that to him. Or um, and with German, that's another thing. He would listen to German from me all the time and then repeat it back. And people that don't speak German, probably his relatives, would say to him, "Now, what are you saying? Is that German? I don't understand German." And while they meant really well, I wonder if that caused a self-awareness in him, like he's doing something not quite right. And he wants to really be accepted and be part of it. That he gave me such pushback for a while to have me even talk to him in German at all. We're kind of past
mm.
that now, but it sounds like there's some shame there. How can I address that best with him?
I think there's, you know, we grow up and we have just a natural ability to feel self-conscious about things, right? And um, and we know the word ashamed, and so maybe we use that, and maybe it's just like I'm embarrassed, really, right? Um, but I think when we hear it as parents from our children, or if we notice that there's a natural bent towards being ashamed, um, I think it's important to step in and to have a conversation like, why did you feel embarrassed, or what's going on? What do you believe about yourself because of you're feeling embarrassed and ashamed? And sorry, it was Brad in the background. Um, so I think you want to address it. I remember Dominic, I think this was the first time he moved out. So he was probably about 18, and he decided he wanted to move to Vancouver and that he would um, he was looking for some places, and so he had gone online. He had found some some possible locations. He knew he didn't want to live on his own, so he was willing to, move into a house that had people in it, and be just one of the roommates, kind of thing. And he had his money, like he was gonna do this. So he went into town and he met, there was two men who owned a house, and they had a section of it that he could live in. And he said, you know what, it's actually like the house is nice and these people seem nice, and I think I'm going to do that. And so he needed to go to the bank and get the deposit, and one of the men said, hey, I'll drive you to the bank if you want. And Dom's okay. And he got into the bank and he got in the lineup and he started to think about what he was deciding on. And he decided, I don't think I want to do this. So he went out of the line, and he's probably in quite some distress at this point, right? So he goes out of the line, he goes back to the car where this guy is sitting, waiting for his deposit. And Dominic just looks at him and goes, I'm really sorry, but I've just decided I'm not ready for this. And I'm not going to rent from you. And the guy goes, okay, fair enough. Drives him back to the bus or whatever. So Dominic gets home. Actually, he phoned and he was really upset. He was crying and he's like, oh, I'm so embarrassed. I'm so ashamed. I went through all this process and then just about did it. And like, I'm a failure. Like, I can't even get out of the house kind of thing. Well, he's only 18 years old. Like, it's not a rush, right? And I just said to him, I don't know if I've actually ever been prouder of you than right now, because you called it in the moment. You went, no, actually, this is not what I want. This is not what I pictured. This is not what I really desired. And it's not even the location I wanted. So you recognized and you listened to yourself and you took care of yourself in that moment. And it was really hard. And I'm proud of you. And he's like, huh. Like he needed that to be turned around for him, right? To see just a different perspective and a different viewpoint of what he was experiencing, because he was just feeling bad for this guy, getting his hopes up, like, hey, we got a renter, and now they didn't. And so, you know, our kids have to learn those paths themselves, but we can coach them along as well. And I think if we're hearing shame sort of on a regular basis, or embarrassment, or any of the other kind of words that mix in there, then we might want to just kind of talk to our kids and like, so what specifically were you embarrassed about, or what specifically are you ashamed about, and what part did you have in that? Is it just circumstances that kind of got in the way, or was it your ability or whatever? And then kind of walk them out of that to a place where they can value themselves for making a choice or trying something that didn't succeed, or even valuing themselves for discovering that they did something wrong, they owned it, and they learned the superpower of apology. Because for me, within shame, apologizing was almost impossible. When shame came over me, my throat would close up on me, and I would start to cry. I couldn't stop crying, and I could not make words come out of my mouth. So it entirely paralyzed me. Now I can cry freely and talk at the same time and go, I'm so sorry. I see what I did. And I will learn from this. And how can I make this right with you? And it just, the amount of power that makes me feel, or how empowered it makes me feel, can hardly be measured by anything else in my life, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, that's very beautiful. And it doesn't make you feel superior. It makes you just empower of your own stuff.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And if someone comes to me and says, you did this, and maybe I did something, but the results of what I did was not what I had desired. You know, like our words can be twisted, or it lands on someone in a way that we didn't intend, right? So if that happens and they come to me, you did this and you've harmed me, or I'm hurt or whatever, I don't have to go into a defensive mode. Shame often makes us feel like we have to defend ourselves. And I don't have to do that anymore. I can hear what I have done. I can recognize how this person hurts. And I can say, wow, I see the harm done.
Mhm.
And I see how you feel and how this has affected you. And I absolutely feel for you in this moment. And I'm sorry this has happened to you. And I'm sorry for my part in it. Right? So that they feel heard and understood. And I'm not taking on any more than really was mine. But at the same time, um, I don't even care if I take on a little bit more because I'm not actually going to wear it.
Mm. Yeah.
I just am trying to make it right.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. The problem isn't solved by us wallowing in pity. The problem is solved by everybody owning their part, and you're asking that humble question, how can I make it right? Yeah, that's very
Yeah.
beautiful. I think people are, and I want to make this our final thought. I know you have a busy day to get to. Um, People are often hoping that they would get some kind of an apology from the ones that have hurt them, or at least an acknowledgement, yes, I did that, or I shouldn't have done that, something like that, that would make people feel like they're valid in their pain and they're not crazy. But since that doesn't happen in the cases that I move with people or I walk with people, or in my own case, that there's no one that said, I've done that. I was completely off kilter. It was wrong. I'm sorry. It was, I'm the problem. So what do you say to people that are in this limbo of, I can't, like the shame that was put on me, I don't receive it because I get it now. These people were really, what they did to me was wrong, but now I don't know what to do with this. I don't want to keep blaming them. How do I let them off the hook without doing the forgiveness, protocol that Christians often say you have to forgive and move on? Um, so how can you be real in your place of, I recognize I took on shame. I don't receive that anymore, but I don't know what to do when I think of these people now. It's just too much hold.
It's it is entirely in our own hands, ours and God's, to move beyond. Because you know what? Half the time when someone does do an apology, it's so half-assed that it really doesn't hit the mark anyways. So I would suggest a couple of things. One is write out the apology you wish you got
Mm.
for yourself. The things that actually hurt you, you address everything. So it's not an apology that sounds something like, if I caused any harm or any, like, if, no, the harm has been caused.
Mm.
Don't gloss over like that. You do actually want to address things. So write out the apology you wish you had got that you may never get. And even rewrite it until you feel like, this is exactly it. And then have someone read it to you and take it all in. And just like let those words that you wrote yourself be the balm in those wounds that need to bring some healing for you. Then I'll tell you a short scenario of how this worked for me. Our son was married, and he and his wife had a little girl, and he had moved to Korea to be with his family, but things went really sideways. And due to family dynamics in Korea, he basically was rejected. We didn't realize this was happening because he was in a situation that he didn't realize how bad things were until we showed up about 6 weeks after our granddaughter was born, just to visit. And we walked into a very tense situation. Anyways, a lot of things happened in that short time that we were there, excruciatingly painful. And we were absolutely traumatized by what went down. When I got home, Christmas happened and a trip happened and sickness happened. And finally, I found myself in March, kind of coming out from being very ill. And I had an opportunity to be in a retreat, a small retreat setting. And as the piano started playing for this particular song, I just started weeping, like it was uncontrollable. And the song is by a friend of ours, and it's called Come to the Table. And the words are very simple. It's like, you will find truth, you will find love, you will find mercy, you will find rest. And the imagery I had was of Psalm 23. Particularly, you set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. And I'm sitting at the table. Jesus is at the table with me, and I'm seeing the things that the song is singing about, the rest and the mercy and the love and the truth. And I'm seeing them. That's the banquet that he has set for me. And I look up at my enemy. And in this case, it's our family in Korea. And I immediately look at Jesus, and I start like almost begging. I'm like, please invite them to the table. What's on this table is what they need. I need it, they need it. If I need mercy, they need mercy. And I want to give it to them. I want them to have it. And so I started begging, and I realized, like, if I can use that imagery for my enemies, they're not, I mean, I used to think that it was like me sitting at that table and my enemy being over there, and me saying, ha ha, look, this is all for me, and you are stuck over there. Too bad. Mm. And I don't think that's what it's meant to be. I think it's meant to be, all of this is for me, but it's also for you. Please come to the table because you need mercy too. And the amount of healing that came just from that picture, just from that short experience of recognizing that what was being offered to me was what I wanted for them as well, just absolutely changed the course of things for me in that relationship. So we'll fast forward to this last, a year ago in October. And our son and I were going back to Korea. We were going to see his daughter and our granddaughter, and see his wife and the family. And I didn't know what to expect, but I had a real peace because I'd had that experience at the table. And it was just, I think I was only there 8 days, and it was just absolutely exceptional on every point. And on my last evening there, my daughter-in-law and I and our granddaughter were heading out or heading back actually. And my daughter-in-law said, my mom is wondering if she could have dinner with us tonight. And you're totally okay. You can say no, but she would like to see you. And so I said, yeah, I'm prepared to do that. And she said, you don't have to. No, you don't have to. And I said, no, I'm absolutely willing to meet with your mom. And then I thought about it. And good thing I only had about 10 or 15 minutes before it actually was happening. And I thought, oh, wow, there's a lot between us, a lot of not good between us. And I thought about the first time I met and how awkward that had been, and me not knowing why it was so awkward until we actually saw the dynamics of what was going on. But I'd done my work, I'd done my part, and I had no idea what had gone on in their household. But I looked up as we were walking towards each other in the alley, and this lovely woman just was beaming. She was smiling so big, and she looked happy to see me. And I thought, wow, like, is this possible after our 2 years ago, you know? And she put out her hand to me when I got close, and I put my hand in her hand, and then she put both her hands around my hand, and then she pulled me in close, and with just a couple inches between our faces, she started speaking, and my daughter-in-law started interpreting over her shoulder, and she just said, I'm so grateful that you're willing to see me, and I'm so happy to see you today. Let's go have supper. So we went into the restaurant, and then she turned to me and she just said, I have to tell you that I pray for you every day, because I cannot imagine what it's like to be the grandmother of this beautiful child and only see her in pictures and videos on your phone. She goes, the cost is so high for you. And so I thanked her. And I thought, wow, she understands. She understands how this has been for us. There's just the torture. And then I turned and I said, and I bless you, because while you do get to see your granddaughter every day, it has also cost you, because she's in your home and your house has been overtaken by a 2-year-old and you have given yourself on behalf of our mutual grandchild. And I bless you for that. And that's where we landed, because we had already been at the table together, receiving grace, receiving mercy, receiving truth and peace and love. And I just don't think that would have been possible had I not experienced the ability to recognize the needs of the other, even when it had been an abusive situation. And that, to me, like, that's probably the most defining point in my life. And I didn't let shame be in the way, and I didn't let unforgiveness keep me rooted to, bitterness and toxic kind of unhealthy thoughts. And I could sit in absolute wonder at what God had done. And it still blows me away. Absolutely blows me away.
Thank you for sharing that. Very beautiful.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you, Eden, for sharing of yourself so much today. And I'm looking forward to, staying family and getting to know each other better and all that. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely welcome. It's been a pleasure.